welcome back to the Call for More podcast. I'm your host, Cassandra Perez, and this is season 2, episode 4. And I'm really happy to be back. I wasn't able to film for a while because I was actually really sick. And when you're sick, it's kind of hard to film with a really good microphone because they'll pick up on how congested I was and the sore throat I was having. So I'm just glad that I'm back and I'm healthy. And I'm also, if you're watching me on YouTube, I'm using a new filming setup. I am filming with a front camera, which I'm really enjoying because I can actually see if I'm still filming, if I'm in the right frame. It's a little bit hard. I just have to kind of cross my fingers when I film with the back camera because I can't see what's going on. I don't have a second monitor. So I'm hoping that the quality is still good for you guys if you guys watch me on YouTube. But for me right now, the quality looks good. So I'm hoping that I get some good feedback from it. But yes, I am back and I'm excited for this episode. I went ahead and titled this episode Finding Hope in Your Brokenness. And one of the reasons why I wanted to film on this topic or record on this topic was because when I was going through my own trials and just hard seasons, I found a lot of comfort and a lot of encouragement from watching other podcasters or just watching sermons that talk about how we find hope when we seem to have lost it all or when life is just really hard. At least that's one of the ways that I was able to cope. And of course with God, but God also provides means and other support that we can lean on. And so I'm hoping that this podcast today can be that for you guys. And two, when you're in a dark place, sometimes all you need is a reminder that you're not alone and that healing is possible and that God is still always working, even though you can't see it or even when you can't feel it. And I think what makes the season of brokenness so hard is the thought that you're the only one going through it, which is a complete lie. There's pain all around us, unfortunately, and there's people that are suffering and we may not even know it, but I think that sometimes we can find some type of comfort in knowing that everyone's world is not always going perfectly for them and that we're all in this life trying to find the joy of the everyday and to receive the peace to continue going. But before I dive into how we're able to find hope, I think it's important for us to talk about what can lead us to a broken place because there's many things that can lead us to these feelings of brokenness. And the truth is that brokenness doesn't just happen overnight. It's often a result of experiences that constantly chip away at our hearts over time. And even thinking about myself, I remember back in 2020, that was probably one of the hardest times of my own life. And I think for a lot of people, just the pandemic in general. But I did find myself completely shattered. I always tell this story to my friends and to other women who sometimes I tell my testimony to that if you were to walk in a room where I was in, you would probably step on the pieces of my broken soul because that is how low I had gotten. And that time was just, like I said, overall super dark. And for me, though, it didn't happen just in an instance. It was the accumulation of stressors, disappointments, and a lot of heartaches that piled up over time, leading me to be paralyzed in my grief. And although brokenness does typically happen over time, like I've been saying, there are those instances, and I want to validate that sometimes we just go through things that will shatter us all at once, where our life can completely change overnight. So that's definitely a reality for some of us. And some things that come to mind that can lead us to these broken moments in an instance are unexpected diagnoses, a phone call that we receive with unexpected news, a betrayal, a dream that was lost, a death. And mainly, there are these life-altering moments that can honestly take away the hope that we had or were maybe barely hanging on to. And I think what leads us to then be stuck in these places of brokenness and loss of hope is when we begin to believe the lie that our story is over, that we're too broken to be whole again, and that nothing good can come out of our pain. And so maybe if you're listening to this right now, it feels like everything that you've been hoping for has crumbled right in front of you. Or maybe you were working toward a dream that suddenly fell apart. Or maybe someone that you trusted recently let you down. They turned out to be a completely different person. Or you might just be wondering if there's anything good that's going to come about in the next season of life. And that's kind of where I'm even finding myself. I'm just like continuously asking God, I'm like, what is next? Because it's kind of hard sometimes to continue holding on to hope. But there's this really key verse in Proverbs chapter 13, and it's verse 12. It says, Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So this proverb really highlights and emphasizes that prolonged disappointment can be emotionally damaging to us, because it says that this hope that is deferred makes us grow sick in our hearts. And at the same time, I do appreciate this verse because it kind of shows how God understands what disappointment does to us, meaning that He knows how much it hurts when our dreams fall apart or when they might feel out of reach because of this scripture that is written for us to read and to understand. I mean, it's literally saying that our heart grows sick when our hopes aren't met. So when a dream feels like it's out of reach, God isn't looking down at us, unable to connect with the suffering that brings. In fact, He knows exactly what this can lead our hearts to experience. But it's important to understand that our story doesn't end there. And before I continue to speak on the hope that we can learn to cling on to again, I want to talk about the dangers of unprocessed pain, because these wounds can lead to a lot of self-destruction when we find ourselves in deep, shattering moments and disappointments and in brokenness. Because sometimes when we go through this pain of life, we don't just experience hurt, but we begin to live from the pain and hurt and open wounds. And instead of allowing healing to take place, we can unknowingly turn our wounds into deeper scars by seeking comfort in things that prolong our suffering rather than things that lead us to restoration. And in my last episode of trauma, I was talking a lot about these self-destructive behaviors, but I just want to briefly go over some of them again, because these are some of the negative outcomes that come from pain that goes unhealed. And so one of them can be numbing ourselves, where we find ourselves escaping things, avoiding things because our pain can feel really unbearable. So instead of facing it and confronting it, we begin to run away from it. We can drown it out with distractions, like we can binge watch shows. I know that when I'm feeling hopeless and when I'm feeling deeply sad, I tend to waste a lot of my time just binge watching shows. I'll be up until 3 a.m. watching things and feeling myself trying to find comfort in anything. And another one that our generation is trying to fight off is this excessive doom scrolling, whether it's on TikTok, on Reels. And we have to be able to acknowledge that this is not the best way to cope with the hard season that we're in. We can also find ourselves overeating, overspending, and all of these things at first feel like a relief because they keep us from confronting our emotions. But over time, they create a cycle of avoidance, making the healing process even longer. So the only person that we're hurting here is ourselves, because we're not actively engaging in behaviors that lead to restoration. And in Psalm chapter 34, verse 18, it says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So again, healing does not come from running away from the pain. Rather, it comes from bringing it to God, the only one who can turn our sorrows into joy. And so when we find ourselves in those broken seasons, the natural human response to brokenness is to seek and crave comfort. But we have to be aware of where we are seeking comfort, because oftentimes we can turn to those temporary reliefs that I was mentioning. And in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13, it describes this so perfectly. It says, "My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold any water." And this verse is so relevant to the human condition, because we humans always try to create replicas of God, who is like no other. This verse is speaking about how we forsake the true living water, and instead we try to build our own cisterns, or in other words, our own mechanisms of comfort, thinking that they will be just as good as God, who can never be replicated. And the verse continues to say that the cisterns that we build are broken and cannot hold water. So the scriptures are reminding us that when we try to bind up our own wounds, we will fail, because we cannot truly satisfy the pains of our souls. Only God can. And at the same time, it's really understandable why a lot of people walk away from God when we are experiencing a lot of suffering and a lot of pain, especially when our visions aren't coming true and we've held on to this hope for so long. And I think that's where we can fall into living in potential bitterness and resentment, either toward others or even toward God, because when we feel betrayed, abandoned, or deeply hurt, we can start to believe that no one really cares about us, that God might actually not be good, and it's better to just trust in my own understanding rather than in God's or in others. And what this can lead us to do is it can lead us to begin to isolate ourselves. We begin to push people away, and we can start to carry unforgiveness in our hearts, which is a very dangerous place to live in, because Hebrews chapter 12 verse 15 warns us and says, "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." So bitterness doesn't just hurt us, it actually spreads, and it affects our relationships, our faith, and our ability to love freely. And I always tell my clients in therapy that bitterness is like a poison to the soul, and it eventually will hurt the people that we love. And personally for me, what I've come to learn about bitterness is that I love my friends and family so much that I don't want to unintentionally hurt them by my emotional pain that is unresolved. So therefore, I have the responsibility to ask God to reveal parts of my heart that may be carrying bitterness so that I can surrender it over to Him and so that He can heal it. Because what happens when you live in bitterness is that you can snap at your friends, you can snap at your family members, even though they're not at fault. And that should grieve us because they're innocent people getting harmed for the resentment that you've built up in your heart over time. And that's like praying that prayer. I think it's in Psalm chapter 51 of "Search me, O God, and clean my heart. Give me a new spirit." Is so good, because at the end of the day, we might think that we are carrying this pure and white as snow heart, but it is only God who can really see what is lying underneath. And He is so good that He will reveal it to us so that we can surrender it over and so that God can begin to heal us. And everything that I've mentioned so far are proactive steps that we need to take in the middle of our brokenness, which is the exact opposite reaction that we tend to do, because oftentimes when we are broken, we start to lose our spiritual appetite. The pain that we're experiencing can make us question God, and if we don't process it well, we can become spiritually numb, losing our desire to pray, to worship, or to seek God. And we might start to believe that if God loved me, He wouldn't have let this happen to me, or why should I keep trusting God when everything falls apart? And we can start to withdraw from God instead of pressing into His presence. And Satan, who I always talk about in every episode because he is always prowling around like a roaring lion waiting to devour us. He is always on the hunt. He is just waiting for our weak moments so that he could come in and completely lead us far away from God. And sometimes the perfect seasons for him to do that is in our brokenness, because he knows we might be dealing with all of these hard questions and our heart may have already grown sick, which makes it the perfect playground for him to come in and twist the truth about who God says that He is. And so although it might feel that God is absent in our suffering, He is actually the closest to us in the storms of our life. Because even when we don't feel like it, God is still working through our pain. He's refining us. And Job 23 verse 10, it says that, "But He knows the way that I take. When He has tested me, I will come forth as gold." So God is always refining us. He's taking the impurities out so that we can shine like gold. And actually, one of the ways that gold comes out so shiny and so pretty and gives it its value and worth is when it's put through the fiery furnace. And that is what we often go through sometimes, through these seasons that are so unexpected. God is using them to refine us and teach us and mold us into new people. And oftentimes the most growth that I have gone through were through these hopeless and helpless seasons where I had no one else but God and me. And sometimes that is really hard because it really has you questioning, well, is only having God enough for me? Or am I idolizing more the visions and plans that I dream for myself? And so These isolating moments can really teach us a lot and test our true faith and the desires of our hearts. So we have to remember that pain doesn't have to lead to destruction. It can lead to growth, transformation, and overall a deeper relationship with God that will prepare us for the next hard season to come in the future, because life is a lot like a mountain. It has its peaks, but it also has its valleys. And God wants us to be prepared and not fall when those hard times come, when it feels like we've been in the valley for a long time. He wants us to hold our head up high, lean on Him, and continue to move forward, because at the end of the day, God is with us always, even though it feels painful and isolating at the moment. And Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. So those times when we're enduring a lot of heartache, they will never be without any purpose. And sometimes we don't even understand the full purpose until the next season comes. And that's where I found myself reflecting like, oh my gosh, if I didn't go through this hard season and I didn't learn how to carry this pain well, I would not have been able to carry this even bigger cut. And honestly, it fills me with a lot of encouragement and reminds me of how resilient I have become through those fiery trials. So if anything, it kind of increases my self-esteem and my confidence in who I am in Jesus. And I would have never gotten here unless I didn't go through those hard times and survive through them. And so one thing that I've learned about suffering is that suffering strips away the illusion that we are in control. Pain oftentimes humbles us, and there is no better place to be in life than to have a humble posture, because we can go through life thinking that we have it all under control, and if the pieces just fall together the way that we've planned, then everything will go well. But God wants to remind us for our own good that it is He who directs our steps. It is He who holds the universe in His hands, and it is not us. And we should live in a posture that is ready to surrender the plans that we have had for ourselves and instead trade it for God, who is all-knowing and will lead us into places that will not harm us but prosper us. Suffering can be an invitation to feel the power of God manifested in our life. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, it says that my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. And what a gift it is that we can experience personally the power of God working and radiating through our lives because of suffering and pain. We can learn how strong we can be because of Christ who lives in us. And there's so many testimonies of resilience and faith that has become stronger because of these seasons of brokenness. It can definitely create a greater sense of purpose. Sometimes for a lot of people, they have found their true calling in a place of their greatest pain. And I know that has definitely been the testimony of my life. If I didn't find myself shattered into a million pieces, I would have never surrendered, humbled myself, and given my life over fully to Christ if I didn't go through the things I had gone through. I also want to point out that sometimes the suffering that we find ourselves in is due to wickedness and evil that people have done unto our lives, and God does not take any pleasure in that. But what God does is He won't leave us there. He will actually pick us up and transform that sin done unto us, or that pain, or that betrayal, or that wickedness that we've encountered, and turn it around for a greater purpose. But God will never take joy in seeing others harm His children. And that is the God that we serve, a God who transforms anything into good. So again, our pain can have a purpose that is even beyond what we can imagine. The things that we've survived, whether it's heartbreak, loss, disappointment, an illness, it can be the very thing that God uses to bring healing to others. At least that's what I've experienced in my own life. I remember that I had a choice, and that choice was I could have either allowed pain to make me bitter or pain to make me better. I had a choice to allow pain to harden my heart or to expand it in order to love others deeper. And it was a hard journey, but eventually I have most definitely allowed the pain that I've been through and the pain that I will one day again walk through to lead me to have a much more empathetic spirit, a compassionate heart, And even Jesus himself was called a man of sorrows. He endured suffering so that he can meet ours. And there's a verse in Hebrews, I think it might be Hebrews chapter 13. It says that we do not have a high priest who can't empathize or sympathize with us. We have a God that knows how to extend grace, knows how to show compassion, because brokenness can soften our hearts, making us more like Jesus. And when we are able to reframe pain like the way that I've described it, it honestly can make you unstoppable and breathe in that hope again that you may have lost. Never forget that there is life beyond pain, because your pain will never be wasted. It can change not only you for the better, but the people around you for the better. The power of God is that he doesn't just save us for ourselves. He saves us for all the other souls that we are interconnected with. And that in itself is just such a beautiful reminder of the blessings that come with the transformation and restoration of our suffering. So I pray that if you're in a season that feels like it's breaking you, that you are reminded that this season is meant to actually build you. We have to remind ourselves that God is an active God. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't rest. He is always working. Therefore, every single day that you wake up with breath in your lungs, God is knitting something together for your own good, even though it doesn't feel like it. And oftentimes, God doesn't deliver us from the storm, but instead he wants to deliver us through the storm. And in the midst of that, I can definitely understand how discouraging it can feel, because the enemy wants to take away our faith during these seasons, because he knows that the storms of life definitely steal away at the comfort of our lives. But I pray that we are all strong enough to not let it take away our trust in God, who never fails us and never lies. And maybe you're listening to me and you're still wondering though why your storm hasn't stopped. So I want to remind you of something from Exodus chapter 13 verse 17. It's when the Israelites, who are God's people, when they left Egypt, God did not take them through the shortest route to the promised land, because remember that Moses freed them. He split the Red Sea through the power of God, and they had a promise that they were going to go into the land of milk and honey and beauty. And there was a much quicker way to get there, yet God chose to take them through the long way around. So sometimes the delay that we're experiencing is God's protection. He's training you in the small battles so that you can win the bigger ones. He wants to equip us with the strength that we're going to need in the future. And he wants us to build the endurance to continue running this hard race of life. And that's because we have a God who cares about us. And the pain might not feel like it's coming from a caring God, but this is why it's so important to not starve our faith while going through the hard trials of life. We have to cling on to the Word of God and our encouraging support system around us so that we continue to hold on to the truth and to his promises, because our story is not over when we are feeling shattered and broken and hopeless, because God is always writing something that is way bigger than we can imagine. And in Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 3-4, it says, "Wait patiently for the vision. It will not be delayed." So even when things seem slow, God's plan unfolds at the perfect time. And the next verse that I want to share just highlights why it's so important to hold on to the promises of God, because in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 18, it says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." So without direction from God, we can lose hope. So keeping his vision in mind keeps us steady. It helps us to continue having that hope for whatever is coming next. And we don't want to be a people that perish, but instead we want to be people that can even encourage others, even though we haven't seen the promises of God fulfilled yet in our own life. So to summarize today's episode, I just want to remind you guys that God's delays are not his denials. He's protecting us and he's preparing us. He is equipping us. And even in the waiting, he's always working behind the scenes. So we have to trust in his plan, even when it takes longer than expected. We have to continue to stand firm, to trust, and to move forward in faith, because Satan is just waiting for our weak moments to come in and delay us even longer. And that's definitely not where we want to be, because we can find ourselves going into those self-destructive behaviors and actually finding ourselves in more pain and in more suffering that was completely unnecessary. So we should be able to be humble enough to know when to reach out for prayer, when to ask for help when we are feeling hopeless, so that others can step in and intercede for us and continue to encourage us. And if for some reason you don't have anyone around you to encourage you, we have the scriptures who are written by people who have faced years of suffering and pain and yet have been able to write about the beauty and marvelous promises of God and his love for us that will enrich our souls and continue to build our faith. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope that it could have provided you a sense of peace, serenity, and encouragement for whatever season that you find yourself in. And if you know of someone who is struggling right now, you can go ahead and send them this podcast episode to help them out and to remind them of the truths of God. And for those who are watching me on YouTube, I hope that you guys like this filming setup a little bit better. I hope that it's just more clear. And yeah, I think that that is all for today. And I'll catch you guys in my next episode. Comment down below. Send me messages on Instagram of what types of topics you guys would like to hear from me next.